Hi, Student Success. This is your video for week 4. Week 3 of the semester is definitely the busiest week, so you've made it through that, and I know that there was a lot going on in that week. So week 4, while there's still a few assignments, it's definitely not as crammed, so that is good news at least. All right, so as a reminder, like I do in most of my videos now, I just want to remind you that, at this point you may not be using this start here section, but you're always welcome to those resources there that go over kind of the introduction and basic things about the class. Also here in your lessons area, the student success workshops, I've had a few trickle in already, so please make sure that you are looking at those offerings and signing up, because again, you guys only have, the first 8 weeks. So already, if you kind of look through, all of these are already done. So we're now into February, so there are still multiple options, but I really do want you to take a course that, or a workshop rather, that intrigues you, that you're really interested in, whether it's a workshop on using Google different ways. If you're to the point where you want to start looking at job postings and resumes, you might look at those. So I really do just want you to find a workshop, not just to get the requirement done and out of the way, but something that is really beneficial. And you can see these courses are offered. This one's at 6 in the evening, 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So they do offer these workshops 7 o'clock in the evening, different days and different times, hopefully to hit on, lots of different availabilities. And then there's lots of just different topics. So you only have, the rest of this month and about a couple weeks into March, because then your class is over. So please make sure you're registering and taking those workshops for this student success workshop assignment. All right, so scrolling down, this is week 4's video. So I'm going to go ahead and go down there. We're going to click into here. And I said that there are less assignments this week, but it actually spans 3 chapters. So I'm going to go through chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 8, and just talk to you about the PowerPoints and the chapters and one college resource in particular that connects with the chapter. But then you can see there are 3 assignments: the chapter 8 discussion, chapter 5 assignment, and then an online survey. So those are the 3 assignments, and so I'll get to those more in depth here in a minute. Well, rather, several minutes. Let's go ahead and click into the materials folder. As I go down here, you can see there's lots of materials because, as I said, there are 3 chapters associated with this. So we'll just start in numerical order. Chapter 5 is going to talk about reading to learn, so the reading process. So first I'm going to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint slide. So chapter 5, reading to learn. So the whole point of this is that college reading is different than high school reading, or just different from just general reading overall. You have to really dig deep, because what you read in college may or may not be talked about in the classroom, but you still might be assessed on it. The College Reading Learning Association did some research into this, and they said about 85% of what we learn in college comes from what we read. That's a huge chunk of our learning is coming from the text materials that we take in. And as I've experienced as a student, and I know some of my students experience, they can read things, it not be discussed, they're still expected to know it. So it's really important to be able to have that critical reading, that reading to learn type approach. So one of the tips is expect to spend about 2 or more hours on homework for every hour you spend in class. Now that's not like a firm rule, because there are some classes where obviously you're going to be reading a little bit more than others. So you want to kind of gauge, based on the class that you're taking, how much you're going to have to invest in that reading process. So for instance, if you're taking like an A&P class, you're going to expect to be reading quite a bit. Our class, for instance, you're not going to be reading quite as much. So it really does vary. So you want to approach reading as a process. And so this is kind of like the steps or the process of being an active reader. And so what we mean by active reading is we don't want to just be passive in our reading. We don't just want to glaze through it just to like check it off and say, yep, I did it. But then a day later, you have no idea what you've read. You want to be active. You want to take steps to make sure that you really are invested in the reading, because even though it's going to take more time during the process, it's going to save you time later because you don't have to go back and reread constantly. So here are the 4 steps. We're going to go into more depth with each of these. Preparing to read. So this is not just, oh, I have to read chapter 1 for next week, open it up, read it, and be done. There are things you should do even before you start reading. So when you get your chapter, let's say again, you have to read chapter 1, you should scan it. You should preview it. How is this set up? How many pages? What are the titles? How is it? Are there bold-faced words, italic words, marginal notes, diagrams? Look at all that kind of information. Anything that's going to stick out to you in a visual way is going to be helpful to look at, because what you're doing is you're setting the stage for your reading. You are preparing some prior knowledge, and you're getting ready to connect what you already know about the subject to what you are about to read. And it's kind of like warming up. Just like you would do for a physical sport, you warm up before you play. When you read, you want to warm up. You want to get your proverbial mind muscles ready to go. And so it really does help you get in the mindset. It also lets you know, like, hey, I may not have a specific purpose in class. Like your teacher may not say, okay, you have a test, so you need to read this. You might just be reading because it's assigned homework. So you have to maybe set your own purpose, right? When I'm done, I want to be able to summarize. I want to be able to come up with the vocabulary, definitions for these 10 words, whatever the case is. That's also going to get you more focused and more motivated to finish the reading if you have an actual goal in mind. So while you're doing this, you're also hopefully getting your tools ready. As you preview, like, oh man, this is 20 pages, but I know a lot about it, so it may not take me very long. Or, oh, this is 3 pages, but I know nothing about this, so I'm going to have to set aside a little bit more time than I thought and maybe have resources near me, my notebook, my pencil, all that kind of stuff. So also, again, looking over and connecting to the course itself. What does this particular chapter or this article or this text have to do with the class? What am I supposed to be gaining from it? Again, if your instructor just says, okay, read this chapter, see you next week, you may not know, oh my gosh, is there going to be a pop quiz? Am I going to have to talk about it? So you want to try to connect it with what's going on in class and set your own purpose, set your own goal, maybe quiz yourself after. So you've set the stage. And now you're going to go ahead and start reading. You've skimmed it. You kind of know what you're expected to read. You want to try to connect what you know to what you're about to read. So all of those things are going to help you as you get ready to do the actual reading. So when you actually sit down to read, one mistake that many people make that actually is detrimental to them is they highlight or they take notes while they read. However, you don't want to do that. You want to read first and then go back and highlight. So one strategy that many people will encourage in their reading research is to, during these stages here, preparing to read, is use the headlines and subtitles to create questions. And that can be your goal. Like by the end of this reading, I want to be able to answer the questions I posed. So while you're actually reading, you look for the answers to those questions. You look at, what's going on in each paragraph. Why are these particular words or titles bold-faced and pointed out? Then, after you've read a section, so let's say you have a chapter, it's 20 pages. That's a lot to sit down and read in one time, 5 pages at a time. So 5 pages, you stop, you go back, and then you highlight or you underline or you take notes on the most important things. Because what people will often do is if they highlight or take notes while they read, they highlight almost everything. Have you ever looked at your page after you're done highlighting and noticed that you've pretty much highlighted the whole darn page? It's because while we read, we think everything's important. But if we wait until we get to the end of a section or the end of a chapter and be like, okay, now what was really essential this section? Then you can have like perspective and write down what was really helpful to you. So you want to read and then go back and take notes, highlight, underline, and then go to the next section. Now, if you only read 5 pages and realize, I have no idea what I just read, you only have 5 more pages to reread. Versus if you read 20 pages and at the end of page 20, you're like, I've been lost since page 2. You just wasted even more time. So chunking up your reading like that can also help you save time because you're checking in with yourself. You're continuously monitoring your comprehension. So you also want to just make sure you can answer questions, whether the ones you posed or the ones that the textbook posed. And when you capture main ideas, You're looking for definitions, you're looking for main ideas. What is the main point that the author has? You might write in the margins. As you read, you can kind of write down questions or maybe highlight something that doesn't make sense. That way you know to go back to it. But those will all help you kind of capture those main ideas. And then finally, when you're done reading, you don't want to just close up and be done. You want to take time to review. What did I learn? How was this connected to what I talk about in class? Sometimes the best way to know if you understand something is to write a summary or put it in your own words to make sure that you actually got it. Go back and revisit anything that did not make sense, kind of fill in those questions that you might have. If you can, talk to other people, save questions for class, answer questions, respond to questions, define other keywords. So all types of things that you want to do within 24 hours of reading, just like you would if you were in a classroom. Within 24 hours, you want to review. You don't want to just close it up and not refer to it again. So those are all kind of your reading process suggestions. Now, chapter 5, again, is that reading to learn. So when you look at the actual textbook link, you can see it goes in and it talks to you about, how to build your vocabulary. Maybe that in particular is something that you struggle with. Maybe you are in a class. I think this section is helpful because not every single text is set up similarly. A math book is going to look a lot different than like a social studies type book, a history book. And so this section really does kind of go through and help you approach different types of text differently. And so I think this one's helpful because you guys are all taking different types of classes. And so maybe that is helpful to you if you're taking a class right now that you're like, I have no idea how to approach this particular reading. Which brings me to also say, ask your instructors, especially in classes where it's very specialized. Your science are very specialized, a lot of your different kinds of math classes and so on. So ask, hey, do you have any tips on how to navigate this a little easier? So click around and really focus in on what you think is helpful. And this goes through those steps again. So really pay attention to these. I know some of you in your discussion posts that I've been reading have mentioned a few times that comprehension is a struggle or focus is a struggle. And so this text in particular will talk to you about, hey, you should really be investing in this reading process. And here is what to do in each of the steps of the reading process and how you can increase. And the one thing I always like to tell my students is rereading is not a weakness. I know it takes more time and I know it's annoying, but when students say, oh, I don't understand, I always have to read something more than once, that's actually a good thing because what you're doing is recognizing that you didn't understand what you've read and you have to go back and revisit. It's just like the writing process. You should not expect to write something and it be gold the very first draft. You have to go back and rewrite and revise and edit and change and peer review. Same thing with reading. You should not expect it to be a perfect understanding the first time through. You might have to go back and reread just certain sections, maybe the whole section. And that's actually a sign of knowing that you didn't understand something, or in some cases, maybe you just weren't paying attention. And then that is a focus issue that you should address. So that is chapter 5, reading to learn. So please, look at those materials and be comfortable with that particular section, not only for the class, but just in general, because as I said, most of what you do in college is going to involve academic reading. A huge chunk of what you learn comes from reading and then just talking about what you've read. So you want to increase that skill. Okay, chapter 7 then talks about interacting with instructors and classes. And I think a lot of this chapter in particular actually is common sense, but some of it's kind of helpful just to be reminded, especially since we have some students who are coming straight from high school, or maybe you've been out of school for a while. So just a couple of things to remember, a lot of the responsibility is on you as a college student, especially in an online class, because you're managing your time, you're managing your assignments, you don't have someone right in front of you checking in with you the whole time. And another thing is that most of you, when you get into your fields, you're going to have instructors who are actively involved in their field. They might be in their field during the day and teaching at night. And so that's another big difference between high school and college is you have people immersed in their fields. And so you want to really kind of take advantage of that and also know that the responsibility still lies on you. So the next couple slides talk about like, why do you attend class? Well, hopefully you know the importance of attending class. There's a large correlation between passing your class and actually being there. And even if some classes don't take attendance, the instructor will still know who's been there and who hasn't. And maybe the most obvious thing is most of you are paying something at least to be, so you want to make sure you're getting your money's worth. So you want to make sure that you're just making that effort. Obviously, there are reasons to miss class. There are valid reasons to miss class, especially during COVID. But in general, even you get sick, your kids get sick, something happens to your home, your vehicle. There are legitimate reasons, but you want to make sure that you save your absences, so to speak, for those legitimate reasons, not just, I literally had a student one semester, it was a fall semester and it was a really nice September day, and he emailed and he said, I'm so sorry, it's just too beautiful out to come to class. I'm like, all right, I mean, you're an adult, that's your choice, but it's also your money and your time that you're wasting. So you want to just kind of be aware of that. So if you have to miss a class, obviously take those steps, check the syllabus, make sure you know what is going on, email the instructor, call the instructor so that they know that you're not going to be there. Communication is key. I know I always tell my face-to-face students, just communicate with me if I know what's going on, and you don't have to give me all the details, because believe me, you don't need to let your instructor know exactly how sick you are, just that you're not feeling well. Communication is really important, and more than likely that instructor is going to work with you. Also, a part of communicating with your instructor and involving yourself is participating in class. Now, participation looks different for everyone. I personally don't think participation is simply the student who raises their hand to ask and answer questions. There's lots of other ways to participate. For instance, some students prefer to wait till after class to email me a question, and that's fine. Other times, participation might simply look like eye contact, like their body language, leaning in, just like if they have their arms crossed and they're leaning back, may project that they're not paying attention or they don't care. That might not how they feel, but that's how the body language comes across. Taking notes, making sure that you are communicating, like those are all different ways to participate. So it's not always like the raising the hand and asking and answering questions. So you need to find out what participation looks like to you, and maybe also what it looks like to your instructor. A lot of instructors have been teaching a long time, so they know kind of what ways students can participate in. So you want to show that you're participating and paying attention somehow. So asking questions, if you're going to be in a class and they're asking questions, make sure that you are making eye contact. One of the things, I have a lot of students with anxiety, like if they just randomly get called on, it's okay to say, I'm not quite sure, or I'm still thinking about this. So, and it's all right, because that's what you're here for. You're learning through the classes. And then if you want to ask an instructor a question, I would much rather my students ask me a question that they deem silly, but I'd rather them ask me so that they know than to keep it to themselves and then feel like they don't know what they're doing. So you really do want to make sure you ask the question. Again, whether it's in class or maybe an email after class, it's so important, because I'm going to keep saying it, you're paying to be here. And not only that, even if you're not paying, you have a grant or whatever, you're investing your time, you're investing your energy, and ultimately you're going into a career that hopefully you have a passion for. And so you want to be able to take these skills and this knowledge with you. And if you don't ask the questions, that might hamper your success. Okay, so these are other kind of tools on how to communicate with your instructor. If you plan to go to office hours, whether it's in person or virtual, make sure you have a plan. Make sure you know what you're going to say. Make sure you have like goals for the particular meeting. Something I like to remind my students of, especially my online students, is if you send an email, I'm not talking about Blackboard, because if I'm in Blackboard, I know exactly what class you're in. But if you're emailing me outside of Blackboard and you just say, hey, I'm Sydney from your class, I have, 150 online students or so most semesters. I'm probably going to take a few minutes to have to root through my papers and see, okay, Sydney from what class? Because I teach 5 different types of classes with hundreds of students in them, so it might take me a minute. So it's not a bad thing to say your full name and say what class you're in. So that way it saves your instructor a little bit of time and might cut down on that response time. Make sure that If you're in person, that's obviously not as big of an issue because they're obviously going to know your face. So make sure, again, these are all ways to make sure you're communicating with your instructor in a positive, efficient way. Other things that this chapter talks about is overcoming anxiety. If you're an anxious communicator, if you're anxious in the classroom, one of the best things, I know I have anxiety. And so if I know I'm going to have a conversation with someone, I will prepare for it, even if it's just like a casual conversation, but I know I'm going to have that conversation. I will prepare for it. I will practice what I'm going to say. And I'm going to focus on what I'm saying so that I make sure I communicate clearly with that person. And then finally, some presentations. If you're in a class that has presentations, our chapter 7 does talk a little bit about making sure that you'll see the key things: prepare, practice, plan. All of those things can help you kind of not only combat anxiety, but make sure you're doing the best on that presentation. So here's chapter 7. Interacting with those instructors and classes. So again, if you go down to the table of contents and you look and see what part of chapter 7 should I pay the most attention to, maybe attendance is not an issue, so you're not even going to look at that one much, but maybe you do struggle with participating, and what does that look like? Or for most of you, I say most because this tends to be something my students really do say they have trouble with, is public speaking and presentations. Like, how can I get some tips to overcome some of this presentation anxiety, to create a good presentation, whether it is just an oral presentation or maybe I have to have some visuals with it. So this really does go into some detail about how to make those presentations a little easier, more effective, and overall higher quality. So if that's an area that you want to pay attention to, really, really look at that. And most of you, if you're not in a class right now that has presentations, whether it's because of COVID or just the makeup of the class, you will be eventually at the college, having some kind of presentation due. All right, the last chapter associated with this week is chapter 8. And so chapter 8 talks about writing for classes. So chapter 5 was talking about reading. Chapter 8 is talking about writing. And so this will go into talking about why is college writing different? How can you become a better writer? What kind of writing will you do? I personally believe that there is a huge connection, and a lot of reading research supports this, and a lot of writing research supports this, that writing and reading are very closely related. And so the more you do of one, the better another can improve. So working on one of these skills actually helps you with both. So this section, if you want to become a better writer, this is going to go through, some instructor expectations as it relates to, thesis, purpose, the writing process itself. Remember, I alluded to the writing process when I talked about reading. The writing process, just going into it, knowing that you're going to have to write and rewrite and edit and review and maybe even have some peer review. All helpful. So the difference between revising and editing, because some people do think that they're the same thing, but there is a difference. And then what if you need help with writing? So this is where I'm going to go to our Stark State website, and I'm going to go to info for current students, and I'm going to talk to you just real quickly about our Writing Center. So we have our Writing Center on campus, and here's kind of like a little overview. We do have some hours right now in availability in person. Often the Writing Center in previous semesters would allow for walk-ins, but right now with COVID, please make sure you make an appointment. So there's the on-campus Stark State College main campus and Akron campus. And then there's also an online writing, which we've had for years, but this really is helpful for COVID purposes. Apparently that doesn't match. But when you get here, you're going to want to create an account, and then you'll go in and you can set an appointment, and it's going to walk you through all of that over here. You can make an appointment. So I'm going to click on the Writing Center here because it's going to take me to a little bit more information. Here we go. So here is, again, more information about the Writing Center. There's the Writing Center online. Here are some resources. Maybe you don't want to actually visit the Writing Center, but you know what? You're like, I could use some information. They have a lot of like PDFs and things. So let's say you wanted to talk about thesis statements. Like, you don't know how to create a thesis statement. Make this a little bit bigger here. All right. Here we go. So it's going to talk about developing a thesis statement, or if you want to know how to put research into your paper. So there are resources if you didn't want to actually talk to someone, but if you are in a class that involves any kind of writing, it doesn't matter if it's an actual writing class or not. If it's a math class and you have to write a paper, the Writing Center is available to you. You can go there and they can talk to you about how to start the assignment, how to work through the assignment, how to make it sure it flows and connects. So I wanted to make you aware, if you weren't already, that we have a Writing Center and that we have a Writing Center online that you can make an appointment. Now, the Writing Center online, I will tell you, is normally an hour-long appointment because it allows time for them to read and chat since it is all through the online Writing Center versus in person. And with any appointment you have with the Writing Center, you want to make sure you have a plan, make sure you have your materials, make sure you have your paper started, or if you don't have it started, the assignment paper, so they know what you're talking about. So that is the Writing Center. I want to make sure you knew about that particular resource. Okay. So I apologize. I know that there's not as much assignments in week 4, but it covers 3 chapters. So let's talk about the assignments now. So let's scroll down. We're going to go into the assignment folder. And the first one you're going to do is your Chapter 8 discussion forum. And this should look familiar because you have done this in previous chapters. Week 1 in particular had Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 set up like this. So this is due by Wednesday, February 10th for week 4 attendance. And it says, complete 2 statements, and you're doing all the topics. So complete the 2 statements next to each. So this talks about writing, sentence level mechanics, the writing process, and seeking help. So this is obviously talking about Chapter 8. Since it's the Chapter 8 discussion forum, this is all about the writing process. So you are responding to all 4 topics and then kind of filling in the blank, if you will, or completing the statements for 2 in each of those particular areas. So that's the Chapter 8 discussion forum, and then you want to make sure you respond to 2 classmates by Sunday. And there's, of course, the example, which they do, so you know how to set it up. All right, next one is your Chapter 5 assignment, and so this one will also look familiar to you because you have already done this as well. But this one in particular refers to the reading process, and so kind of similar table. Here are the 3 areas of reading: reading comprehension or understanding, your speed, your vocabulary. So you want to think about those 3 areas and maybe are you struggling in those? What could you do to improve them? So think of 2 things for each aspect of reading that you could take, like an action you can take. And we talked about some of them in the chapter. Maybe you'll read about them on your own. What action will you take? When will you expect to take that action? And how will you know you've accomplished the action? So make sure you're just detailed, not just say, I can read better, which is, it sounds silly, but make sure, like I will see my overall comprehension improve based on my test scores, or I will find that I'm having to reread fewer times, or so whatever, be a little bit more specific with how you'll know that you accomplished the action. So that's your Chapter 5 assignment. And like your other chapters assignments that you've had like this, you'll click in when you're ready. You will browse, find it, and then hit submit. Okay? And that is due by Sunday the 14th. And then the last thing is your online survey right for you. Okay, so this is kind of a 2-parter because the actual survey itself, I am not going to see your score. It says take this short survey, and you'll see it's hyperlinked. So you'll click on it and it's going to take you to a survey through the college website, and you're going to answer these questions all the way through. And then when you hit submit, it's going to give you a score. Once you get your score, it says, after you take the survey, submit your score under Write Submission and comment whether you believe online learning is right for you and why. So that's the part people often forget. They'll go in here, they'll click Write Submission, and they'll say, oh, I got a 24 or higher. But then they don't tell me if they agree or disagree with that. So this survey usually gives you ranges. It'll say like something like 0 to 14, 15 to 23, 24 or higher. And obviously the higher your score, the more equipped it says you are for online learning. So you can tell me, I got a 24 or higher, but I don't agree because online learning is not my preference. Or you can say, oh, I got a 15 to 23, but I really like online learning. So you're going to tell me your score and why you believe that's correct or incorrect, kind of reflect on that. So that's what I mean that's a two-parter. You have to take the survey first, which I do not see your survey, but you're going to tell me what your results were and whether you believe online learning is right for you and why. And that can just be like a sentence long. You don't have to give me like an entire paragraph unless you need to explain it. Sometimes a sentence won't do. I just don't want to see, I agree. Like, give me a little bit more than that. So give me a little context at least. All right, so that is week 4. You have chapter 5, chapter 7, chapter 8 to look over and review. Your chapter 8 discussion, original response by Wednesday, February 10th. Responded to classmates by the 14th. And then submit your chapter 5 assignment and your online learning right for you survey with the response by Sunday the 14th as well. All right, hope you all have a great week. Have a good Valentine's Day weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.